So this is the letter Resh. The word Resh is the same as the name of the letter, which means head. I was talking to Keith here earlier, and he was saying the thing about this letter Resh and what it represents, it's not just the man, it's the dignity of the office. Think of the presidency, or think of the king, or think of, Jamie looks pretty spiffy typically, wearing a suit and tie when he comes up here. There's a certain dignity associated with responsibilities. And certainly if you're a blue-collar worker, as myself, sometimes you have to crawl under houses, and so you put on the attire befitting the job. So the meaning of the word Resh, if you look in the Red Dictionary, you'll see a couple different places where you get the concept. One is Resh Aleph Shin. That would be Resh, that would be the head, that's the name of it's pronounced also Rosh. But if you look at Shin Resh, it's the word for prince or Sar. Some people maybe have heard the phrase Sar Shalom. It means prince of peace. But Shin Resh also means a poet or a bracelet chain or I believe it says like a navel chain. Maybe that's something that like belly dancers would wear, or maybe it's umbilical cord. Sometimes I don't quite understand where some of the words come from in the dictionary. But this notion is, as a chain, as a bracelet, as a poet, as a prince, a captain, a chief, a patron, an angel, an overseer, what do all these have in common? And so as we've been going through the various different weeks, I've been trying to help you understand by the use of the dictionary and by the use of the chart how to extract or extrapolate other meanings other than the typical and the obvious that you'll find in a translated one-word-to-one-word reference. And what I mean by that is if you look at all these words for the meaning of Sar, which means prince, which means head, captain, chief, leader, what has that got to do with a poet or a bracelet chain? Why should those things be included in the words? And I mean, in English, they're very different, but why should they all be the same words in the Hebrew? And so what I try to do is sit there and say, it's like when you're doing mathematics and you have various different fractions and you're taking a test and you're saying, multiply or divide these or add these together. You have to find the lowest common denominator where they're all equal. The denominator's equal, and then you add or multiply the numerators. Well, what's the common denominator between all these things? Just look at a few. The bracelet chain, a governmental prince or a captain, and say a poet or a singer. Remember, the word shir shirim is shin yod resh. It's shir is almost, you can hear the word siren. If you put a noon at the end of the word, it's one who does it. So one who sings would be a sir, shirin, shiron. Again, you're like the book of Edenics, Isaac Moseson, playing with where these English, Latin, Greek, other languages fit all together. One who sings, so a singer, a poet. Well, artists and poets, their job is to take difficult matters, either philosophical matters or political struggles or the conundrums, the angst of life that we all just feel and don't quite know how to put it into words, and they put it into little words of rhyme and verse. Maybe put a little tune to it. Make it simple. Make it easy to apprehend and go, yeah, that's the way I feel, just like that. And you might hear the popular song on the radio, and every time it invokes some relationships of the past or some points of view of the past because it zeroed right in. And so the job of the prince is to take the difficult matters of governing a group of people. And if you just look at the economics of what a good government should do, it manages all the resources. It has a certain tax that it pulls in from everybody, figures out where to put it for the best public good, and then has, you might say, public works projects, roads, defense, maybe education, things like that any individual wouldn't be able to do or wouldn't have the responsibility to do, but that's what a good government would do. What would a poet do? Take these matters, turn them into verses. And the things that they do to make things easy to deal with is kind of like a delicate bracelet chain. Link by link, matter by matter, word by word. So if you think about, well, what is the Sar Shalom? Well, then you have to look at the word shalom and say, well, does it mean peace? Is that really what it means? I was talking to my wife earlier, and the phrase, these dogs that are causing trouble, and she said, "Hey, just let me, rest in peace." It's like, boy, who's the first person who thought of that? Rest in peace. Maybe they had a bunch of animals, a bunch of kids, a bunch of trouble, and it's like, you can just picture some lady saying, "Just let me rest in peace." And so finally, when your last day comes, it's like, But if the person who had first thought of that to put it on the tombstone had actually copyrighted it, trademarked it, boy, they'd make a fortune. Because this concept of rest, finally, I get a chance to rest in peace. And then what my wife said was, hey, that's the word Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom literally means rest in peace. It's like, wow. So it doesn't necessarily have to do with death, but the concept of nobody's hassling us anymore. There's just no squawking dogs or animals or needs or necessities or husbands or wives or government people or creditors and nobody on the phone. It's just that breath, that space of resting in peace is actually what the Shabbat is supposed to be all about. And the benefits to Israel is that we were granted that privilege. Or is it a right? Or is it an obligation? A responsibility? The interesting thing about what Yahweh did, he took the necessary things that he knew we really needed, but he knew that we'd all be maybe too industrious, too energetic, too responsible, too committed to the task, so we wouldn't take a day off. So he said, tell you what, I'm going to make it a commandment. You must take a day off. It's like, oh! It's like, but you need a day off. But I can't take, you must take a day off. So the interesting thing, by making a commandment what we needed, if we obey the commandment, we get all the benefits of what we really needed, but on top of that, he said he'd reward us. It's like, this is like a win-win-win sort of situation. And yet we still complain about it and find all sorts of reasons and loopholes to kind of sneak around and not do it. And well, maybe it didn't include this. And it's like, but then Yeshua comes along, the Prince of Shalom. And see, the word shalom isn't just peace, but it's full, complete, healthy, at rest because it's done. It's accomplished. If you build a house and you put the coat of paint on it and you did the yard, and somebody says, and you say, well, I'm done. And somebody says, but there's another thing to do. It's like, no, they're all done. Well, you should do the yard. I just did the yard. Well, you should paint the house again. I just did paint the house. 2 coats. If you're done, you're done. If you're done, you're done. If it's complete, it's complete. There isn't any, just one more thing. Well, the word shalom is that concept. And so what he's tried to tell Israel, when you get to the end of the week, the 7th day, no matter where you're at, call it done. As much as that you were going to suddenly drop dead, be put in the ground to rest in peace, consider it done. For the week, it's just done. You go, yeah, but I got it. No, call it done. And it's like, it's our responsibility. It's our sense of being good people that makes us want to not call it done. But he said, I'm making it a commandment. You call it done, I'll pick up the slack of whatever maybe isn't done. I don't know why it's making noise. I've got this thing pretty out in the open this time. Anyway, what I'm saying about the Shabbat Shalom concept is I heard a saying. Now, we talked last week about the difference between a Christian expectation versus a Jewish expectation. And I wasn't raised Jewish, so I can't really say I know what those guys are talking about, but I've heard stories. I was raised Christian, but yet there's a couple thousand different Protestant denominations, plus there's the Vatican Catholic thing, plus there's various orthodoxies, which are in antagonism to the Catholic frame of mind. And so when you say the Christians, Who are you talking about? Over 2,000 years? Billions of people, all with different frames of mind? Christians fighting Christians over the centuries because they didn't quite believe the same doctrines? You can't really say the Christians and think you're referring to any one particular group. But the notion, generally speaking, the Christians say, well, Jesus is our Sabbath peace, is our Sabbath rest. If we're in him, we are granted rest. Or it's as if we've already got rest. We're at peace, we're at rest. So therefore, we can work every Saturday or play or games or do whatever we want because that's not what it's about. But I've heard that the Jewish sages, generally maybe that's folklore, but they've said, what will bring the Messiah back? Now their notion of what brings the Messiah, Mashiach, to arrive, the word to arrive is Bet Aleph, or Bet Vav Aleph. Monty Judah has a paper, an article, a magazine sent out called Yavo. Yod, Bet Aleph, or Bet Vav Aleph is the word Yavo, which means he is returning. In Greek, the word is Maranatha. He's coming back, he's returning, so that's what this is about, that's what this picture is about. We're talking about what does it take, what is he waiting for? You know, and I've kind of talked in the past about, is he up there saying, well, look, it's not the schedule, the bus return, the time for me to come back, it's not yet, I'm waiting for a certain time. And we're sitting there saying, gee, there was, 98 reasons why he was supposed to return in 1998, that type of a thing, or 1984, or people, 100 years ago, everybody thought he was going to return at a certain point. It's like, what's he waiting for? Why hasn't he, the expected one, returned? And so the point is, what's the difference between the Christian expectation and the Jewish expectation? But I've heard that this folklore of Judaism says, if all the Jews in the world would just keep Shabbat 2 weeks in a row, it'll bring the Messiah. It's like, we could almost think, oh, that's kind of silly. But on the other hand, it's like, no, wait a minute, think about that. Are they serious? Do they really think so? And why would that be? So one of the things I've said earlier in the class is a pondering notion, is to say, what's all this about? Is to say, we read about things like Ezekiel 36:23, the tipping point of Yahweh giving Israel the blessing, something happening that hasn't happened yet on the face of the earth, the return of the Mashiach, the restoration of the kingdom of Israel. Remember when Yeshua rose from the dead, the first thing the disciples asked him, is it now you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? We thought you were going to do it before, but they killed you. But hey, you're back, and they can't kill you now because look, you're superhuman. Now will you do it? He goes, see you later, boys. And he goes, wow. But then the Malachim, the angels, showed up and said, why are you guys standing there looking up into the sky? This same one, Yeshua, the redemption of Israel, Yahweh's salvation, Yahshua, is going to come back the same way you saw him leave, which is to say, appearing in the sky and coming back and landing on top of the mountain. But until that day, be about the business that he told you to be about. And it's like, so then, what's the Jewish expectation? Well, they expect Israel to gain the kingdom, gain preeminence, be considered to be pretty tough people, pretty respectable people, dignified. Well, there's verses, I hope we can get to them, which are in Zechariah that I was going to address today, as well as Deuteronomy, which talks about the very matter that Yahweh said, I have taken Israel, Yehuda, the northern and southern kingdom, and I have made people hate them, scorn them, ridicule them, despise them, as I scattered them across the face of the earth. That anyone thought that you had one of those guys in your midst, it's like something stinks. Oh, it's you. You're one of those Israelites. You're one of those Jews. Or you're one of those Christians. Or you're one of those. See, the Christians have alienated themselves from Judaism. Back in the days of Constantine, the first believers in Yeshua were all Jews. It took 300 years before Constantine made it the state religion. But by doing so, and you can look at the historical records, by doing so, He sent his boys out to scavenge the world for all the various religions having to do with avatars, having to do with resurrection, having to do with these Messiah Christ figures. Christos is a Greek word. And he apparently conglomerated them and presented Christianity and says, hey, I'm one of these guys. And he changed the day, the respected day, the Kadosh day of Yahweh's mouth from being Shabbat, the seventh day, and made it to regard his words, the venerable day of the sun god Mithra. And by doing so, they changed the day to Sunday. And that's why the Christians regard Sunday, though the cover story was, well, Jesus rose from the dead on Sunday morning. Like, well, no, he didn't. He would have risen from the dead probably Saturday after sundown. But the point is, what's Christianity and what are they looking forward to, and how do you know what you can trust if it's blended with all these different things? And as I mentioned once before, I had always, remember there was a movie made, it was called The Greatest Story Ever Told. My dad really appreciated that story. It's still messing up, okay. So the thing about The Greatest Story Ever Told, are we on? We hot? Yeah.
You're on the Wi-Fi.
Hello? On the Wi-Fi. Hello?
You're on.
You're on. The thing about The Greatest Story Ever Told was that I thought that Christianity was a very unique, the only one like it in the entire world. And so it's like, wow, this is a great story. Created the universe, becomes man, becomes flesh, born of a virgin, dies, is crucified, resurrects from the dead, ascends into heaven, has 12 disciples, sends them out. And it's like, this is an incredible story. It's got to be the most incredible story on the face of the earth. Well, some other people, I believe the Christians, did some studies, and they found that there was up to 20, I haven't seen this study myself, so I can't tell you, but 20 different stories of various cultures around the world with the identical story. And some of them from before the time of Jesus in 2,000 years ago. This is like a kick in the head to me. What do I do with this information? Suddenly we don't have the greatest story ever told. Suddenly I have to confront possible facts. Are they facts? Now I have to investigate the facts. But I have to confront the possible scenario that Christianity as we know it is an evolved fiction, not the truth as we've been told. And you go, well, that can't be so. I heard the Catholics say on their own radio station, they said, we know that we're right because we won. What do you mean you won? We conquered the earth. We have stomped the earth and pillaged the pagan heathen nations. And the proof is that we're right is that we've been successful all these years. Just look. Go to the Vatican. You'll see gold that has been stolen from every country on the face of the earth. There are some who even say that it's the Vatican armies behind the control of the government of the United States in places like NATO and the UN and on and on and on. Various assassinations of dignitaries around the world have been under their directive. Now, I don't know if these things are true, but those are rumors. But the question is, why would they do such a thing? Well, as I've thought before, the motto on the dollar bill of the United States says, in God we trust. And it's like, well, which God? And what do you mean trust? In the scriptures it says there's two deities. One is called God and the other one's called money. Neither one of them is Yud He Vav He. But who is it that we trust in? Is America a Christian nation? It's on the UN record as being a pagan nation. What does that mean? So all of a sudden I had to, a few years ago, reassess everything I thought I believed. Who do I believe in? Why do I believe it? Where's the truth? Where's the evidence? Oh, just have faith. Well, the word aleph mem nun, where we get the word amen, actually can be rendered as faithfulness. So if Abraham was himself faithful, that's the model of our faith, not just that he believed in something. You can concoct any story and believe it and have faith. That doesn't make it true. That doesn't mean you'll merit any sort of regard from Yahweh himself. He said, I'll paraphrase, he said basically, woe to anyone who makes, creates, perpetuates falsehood. That one has no place in my kingdom. Yeshua said that. Around the neck of the shirt that I was wearing for the 3-4 weeks inside the Mishkan covered place, the Kadosh place, on the lapels were the words Emet and Chesed, truth and kindness. And they have the little wings, like Jamie pointed out, it looks like kind of Air Force, because it's LL, he's the most high. So the Air Force wings are blue, purple, and red and white, centered around the two words Emet and Chesed. I believe it's in the Psalms. He says, you should have Emet and Chesed around your neck. And your lapels. It's like, oh, maybe it's figurative. It's like, why not to figurative than to real? Why not do that? So it's just a thought, you know. As we design our attire, as we design our belief systems, as we construct the paradigms of our consciousness, what do we use to establish truth, confirmation? What's the measure to verify what is what? We talked about the first name that Yahweh was told Moshe, when Moshe said, who shall I say sent me? And he says, Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh. The word Asher is a straight line. It means to authenticate, to verify, to confirm. So Yahweh is all about the word Anochi, which is translated I am. Of course, Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh is translated I am that I am, or I will be what I be. But the word Anoki is also the first word of the Ten Commandments, and it means I am. But it also word Anok means plumb line. Anoki would be regarded as my plumb line. So here we have this, that Yahweh has, actually the other word for I is Ani. So on this picture of the class here with the Nun Samic and all the different alphabet letters, it says Ani Yahweh. If you look at Aleph, Aleph means I will, Nun is to impart the activity, and Yod means this is my stuff, this is what I'm doing. And you could say all through the Old Testament, whenever it says Nam Yahweh, it's translated the word of the Lord. But Nun, again, is to impart like a lightning bolt, and Aleph Mem is the word for mother, or metropolis, or a womb, or a people, a nation. And it's kind of like he's saying, I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to bring this about. I'm going to be the one who's responsible for mothering this event that I just now said, or I'm about to say. And it's kind of like, it's the picture on this chart here. It says Nam Yahweh. It's like a rubber stamp. I made it look like a rubber stamp. I'm actually going to get a rubber stamp made at the print shop that says Nam Yahweh. If we just say, we're reading through, it goes, the word of the Lord. It just kind of rolls off your tongue, the word of the Lord. It's like, okay, whatever. It's like, this is really serious business. When he stamps, as it were, his signature, Nam Yahweh, you can say, Nun Aleph Mem. What does that mean? Well, you look up in the red dictionary, you look at the individual letters of the word, and he says, there's another place where he said to Moses, numerous times he says this, you have to learn to recognize his fingerprints, to see his tendencies of his character. He says, you guys I'm going to bring you out of Egypt, and you're going to come back here and worship me on this mountain. And Moshe said, what's the proof? What's the sign? How will I know you're really going to do that? And he said, you're going to come back here and worship me on this mountain. That's the evidence, that's the sign that what I said is going to happen. Because what I said is going to happen, and when you see it, you'll remember that's what I said. And 80 times in the book of Ezekiel, he says this phrase, then they will know that I am Yahweh. And what it means is, he said, destruction is coming. That's my word, Nam Yahweh. And when it comes, you're going to remember that I said this. And then you'll know, oh, Yahweh said that. Well, who's Yahweh that we should have regard of him? That's what Pharaoh said. Oh, I'll show you who I am. So when people say, why should we regard Yahweh? Why should we care about this Old Testament deity of a people long, long ago in a land far, far away? Because Nam Yahweh. Because Ani Yahweh, Anoki Yahweh, Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh, said. And And so this study is to say, what did he say? What did he say? And so one of the things I've tried to do is show you different things that I found he said. And I have a few things to show tonight here that I found in Zechariah as well as in Daniel, if we can get to them, which to me are astounding. But see, the thing about Eya Asher Eya is that Eya looks just like Eya. And so I drew this picture on the board of a bullet point and a line and another bullet point. And the idea of that was to say, this bullet point looks like that bullet point, and there's a straight line connecting it. What he said looks like what he's going to do. There's no distinction. When he said, let there be light, he said, Yehi or, Va, that's the connector, Yehi or. But see, in English, it's translated, let there be light, and there was light. But do you hear the difference? Let there be, and there was. Two completely different sentences. Now you have to play with the thoughts. Well, one is kind of a command, and the other one is like a reporter's notation of what just happened. But what he says, Yehi or, Va, Yehi or. This bullet point looks just like this bullet point. You see that? And there's a straight line connection, which is the Vav, which is the connector. What I'm trying to show you is this question of identity of Yeshua must look just like Yud He Vav He. Now, as we discussed earlier in the class, that these four colors, blue, purple, red, and white, I believe could be taken as standing for the letters Yud He Vav He. His name in colors. Yud, the blue, hand of the Creator. He's the creators of the heavens and the earth. He, the Torah, the royal decrees, the expression of the Creator. He is the expression, Yod is the Creator, the Torah, that's the purple. That's the royal decrees. Purple, the color of royalty. Red, the word Dalet Mem, Dam, is blood. Adam was made out of Adamah, which is red earth. Earthiness. So Yahweh showed up as a man form, taking on Adamah, clothing himself with the dust of the earth to walk the face of the garden that he made. Hey, the white. White linen always speaks of righteous works. The righteous works of the Kadoshim, the saints, the Talmudim, the believers, the followers, the ones that are doing what the Torah says. So when you have Yod, He, Vav, He, Vav being connected, as we discussed a few weeks ago, the two He's are the identical letter. One is the expression of Yahweh, Yod He, and the other is the expression of a man, Vav He. And so the He, the expression of Yahweh, should look just like the expression or the revelation or the appearance of the man. And whether the man, the Vav, is actually Yeshua, or whether it's actually Israel, or whether it's actually any one of us, doesn't really matter. So then you get to Isaiah 53, and the Christian voice says, hey, that's talking about Jesus Christ. The problem, and I've expressed this before, I'm trying to clarify because, going back to the Resh is, I believe, a picture of Yeshua coming back and revealing his true identity, character, and nature in the sky, which this is a picture of in the book of Revelation, and I'll get to wrap that up in a few minutes, but I'm trying to show you about the character, nature, and identity of who Yeshua really is as the Resh man, the quintessential human. Adam Kadmon is the way one has talked about it, which is the ancient man, the man before the man, the prototype man. Who is this Yeshua? If he must look just like Yahweh, then for the disciples to say, well, show us the Father and it'll be sufficient for us. He says, don't you get it yet? How many words did he say? The Apostle John, the writer of the Gospel of John, said, there's so many things that this Yeshua said and did that if we were to write books about them all, perhaps the whole world wouldn't be big enough to contain them. So we've only gathered a few. Monty Judah did a wonderful talk, recording on the Gospel of John, and he says, all through there are these Hebraic idioms that we don't see in English, but he brings them out. But what he says is, John starts off saying, I've written these things to prove, to give case for, regarding this one Yeshua as the Mashiach. The problem is, by the time Constantine got a hold of the ideas and the doctrines, he spun them, twisted them, incorporated heathen, pagan practices and ideologies, and he set about to obliterate anything Hebraic or Jewish, Judaistic about it. And I've heard that modern day rabbinical Judaism does not necessarily look like the biblical model of the Old Testament. And Yeshua was contending with various rabbis, Pharisees, Sadducees, and then there's a whole other group called the Essenes, which we don't know how they fit in, but there's some that think perhaps John the Baptist was one, perhaps Yeshua spent some time at Qumran with the Essenes. That's a whole other matter, it's all speculative. The point is, he was contending with these guys, and they said, why do you pervert, why do you ignore the teachings of the elders? And he says, why do you pervert and ignore the teachings of Yahweh by the teachings of the elders? By instructing your people to do things that were never part of the instructions. You see, so I'm not suggesting that we all become rabbinical Jews. I'm not suggesting that we all become Christians. I'm suggesting we figure out what Yahweh said. And the only way we can do that is to read his words. But here's the thing. Who is the true Mashiach? I thought it would be interesting. Years ago, back when I was a kid, there was a TV show called To Tell the Truth. They typically had 3 people sitting there, and they had a panel of some movie stars, and they would ask them questions, and then these various movie stars would answer, the various other people, and one of them was truly the professional that they were asking questions of. It might have been something about atomic energy, for all you knew. But the other 2 would give answers as if they knew what they were talking about, but they were lying. And then it was the panel's obligation to try to guess which one of these guys actually was telling the truth. And some of these guys would fabricate such great stories, they got votes, and so they got awards or prizes for how well they swindled and bamboozled the host of, or the board of the stars that were guessing. And I thought it'd be really interesting to have, do a mock show like this, to have 3 people all claiming to be the Mashiach. One could be, maybe the Islamic version, one could be the Christian version, one could be the Jewish version, and just start firing questions at these guys. How would you know who the true one was? Maybe you could have a 4th one who simply said and validated the words that were in the Torah. Now, who would you pick? It's got to be the 4th guy. It's got to be the one who simply validated, affirmed, and walked out, lived out, displayed every word of the Torah that we should do. That was who he was. These other guys, though they claimed the name, aren't the guy. So Yeshua was considered to be sinless. By what measure? There's only one standard, the plumb line, the 10 Commandments, which themselves can be encapsulated in 2, which is love Yahweh, your Elohim, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. That's from Deuteronomy and Leviticus. It's not from the New Testament. It was quoted in the New Testament by Yeshua, but he wasn't making it up. In fact, I heard someone else I was talking to, they said, in fact, let me ask you this question, ponder it for a moment. When did the Old Testament matters, at what event? Here's the timeline, Old Testament, here's an event, and now we have New Testament. What was the event that changed the Old Testament to the New Testament? The Ascension, Pentecost, any other guesses?
The shedding of the blood. The shedding of the blood.
The crucifixion, the shedding of the blood?
Well, Paul said the testator.
The death, okay, but basically the crucifixion, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so here we have 3 answers, maybe there's more. The crucifixion, the ascension, or the day of Pentecost, which was 50 days later. And was there another voice?
A quiet period where there wasn't much recorded between Malachi and Matthew, perhaps.
Okay, so you're suggesting that the Old Testament changed the New Testament. There's about a 300-year period, which is actually where the book of the Maccabees apparently fits in, but that's before Yeshua ever showed up. From that point of view, and I'll just discuss this for a moment, I want to show you some reasoning. From the point of view that it was during the period between the last book of the Old Testament, which is different in the Jewish rendering, it's Chronicles, not Malachi, and the book of Matthew, which would be the 4 Gospels. That's to say that when Yeshua was born, that suddenly it was the era of the New Testament. But yet he hadn't died. Nothing had changed. There was no official, legal change in anything. So how could that be the New Testament yet? Still had the Old Testament. There's the crucifixion. I've heard some people say that. It's like, okay, soon as he died, everything was different. Some people say the Old Testament, the law, was nailed to the cross the moment he died. Now some might say, well, what about the day of Pentecost? That's the birthday of the church. We've been told it was the birthday of the church. It was actually the 3rd feast of the commandments in Leviticus 26. That's still Old Testament. Well, what about the ascension? Well, that's when he's leaving. Well, that kind of sets things different, but think about this. The New Testament concept is that the Old Testament is passé, done away with, and of no regard any longer, because it's all merited righteousness to us. Our white robes of righteousness are imparted, bequeathed, inherited, as it were, by his death. But think about it. If that's the case, then that means the 4 Gospels are Old Testament. They're not Christian. They're done away with. The 4 Gospels, he just spent 30 years, or at least 3 years, or according to Michael Rood, maybe 70 days, or whatever it was. I forget the detail about that. But the point is, he spent this time teaching and preaching and doing all this Old Testament stuff, validating the Torah, teaching the Tanakh, contending with the rabbis, all of a sudden gets hung up on the cross and says, never mind, it's all over now. Well, then what did he do that for? That means we could disregard all his teachings and say they don't matter at all. They're of no regard, because all things are made new when he rises from the dead. But yet, when he rose from the dead, I don't see any records that says, hey, just ignore all that stuff I said before. That has nothing to do with you. It's like, well, then when did the Old Testament become New Testament? I would contend that it never did. But we were told that things changed. Which voice are you going to listen to? Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh. Yehi or, Vayehi or. No change. This is the plumb line. Oh, the plumb line doesn't really matter. It's just something close. You know, it's just kind of somewhere in the ballpark. Which ballpark? How big is the ballpark? If the plumb line doesn't matter, whose job is it now to determine how big the ballpark is? Is it a little ballpark? Is the ballpark as big as the universe? Does it just not matter at all? Now, who gets to make up doctrines if Yod-Heh-Vav himself is no longer the authority? So the point is, being dressed like this, blue, purple, red, and white. Resh is the head, so I got this head thing, because it's about the head, right? This is just the appearance to remember, hey, Resh, this is about the head. So wrapped around kind of like turban sort of a look, you know, the blue, purple, the red, with the gold. Colors of the Mishnah, the colors of Yahweh's name. What would Yeshua look like? Wouldn't he look just like Yahweh? Wouldn't he dress himself up just like the only thing there is to be dressed in, which is the Creator's preference, the expression of the Torah in pure truth, the blood of the man that he created to be the pinnacle of his creation, that he chose by his Creator's preference to take upon that form upon himself and be lowered down, as it were, into the pit of vipers, to be chewed on and punctured and bleed out his own life blood, but yet walk in acts of righteousness, white linen, according to the design of the Torah instructions, walking out the purple legs, as it were, the regal, the regulations, as he described. Wouldn't that be what Yeshua looks like? And what about this, what's called a bandolier, your armament? Soldiers wear something like this. But this is the big tizio that I think I referenced a few weeks ago. It's actually made out of ropes, and it's tied with 10, 5, 6, 5. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Shinayin on the back, which was 21 and 16. the salvation and the deliverance covering your back. Yod He Vav He. The breastplate of righteousness. That's who Yeshua is. That's what we're supposed to be. We are being conformed to His image. There's nothing else. Nothing else matters. So with the presentation of anything else, any other doctrine, any other religion, any other mighty one, they're of no consequence, no regard, not worth the breath or the time to discuss with or argue with. It just doesn't matter. Which is why I've said, this class is about looking at the Torah, the Brit, the covenant that Yod He Vav He made with His people Israel. And He said, this will endure forever. I will not make it cease. And even Yeshua said, till heaven and earth pass away, not one stroke of the pen, not one jot or tittle. Regardless of what those means, those are maybe other things, but nothing that was ever written. Heaven and earth will exist until every single dot is accomplished. Heaven and earth are still here. That means the stuff that's written in the Torah has not yet been accomplished. Well, then you go back, though, and say, well, let's look at the Resh. What's the Resh? So we'll describe a few of the attributes of the letter, shape. The Paleo Resh. Well, this isn't working. I had a few people say that they really couldn't see on the camera because of the glare and the colors. I wish we would have had a big, thick marker just for the record where it is again. We'll try to get better stuff. But anyway, here's the Resh. Now, just as a little... think of this as a game. Let's suppose you hadn't taken this class and you don't know what these letters are. Somebody draws a shape like this. Do you have any sense of what that looks like, what that might mean? It's kind of almost an embryo shape. Kind of a, with a little hand. As a matter of fact, it's drawn on the picture over here. I believe, kind of, the eyeball, it's kind of almost like a tadpole. It's kind of the floor plan of the tent, but you can get some feelings of that, right? And it's kind of a picture of the beginning of a body, of an embodiment, right? And again, I know I'm feeding the ideas in your mind. I'll hopefully give you a little period of time for you to think for a moment, but to keep the class rolling, I got to do this. I did this at a Torah study one time. We're just sitting around talking, and I didn't know anything about these ancient letters, so I said, hey, I'm not going to tell you what the letters mean. You just look at the shapes of the letters and just throw out different ideas of what you think they are. And people came up with some interesting things. But here's this letter Bet. The next letter was this. And one guy said, it looks like a man standing at attention, like some noble person, or maybe it looks like a flag, or where would you have a flag? You have a flag where somebody rules, right? This is the flag. You might have a flag of a gas station, or a flag of a football team, or a school, or a flag of a country, but it shows a kind of authority and preeminence, a stature, a dignity of the office. Happens to be exactly what Resh means. And then there was this other letter. And it kind of thought, well, somebody thought it would kind of look like a star. Maybe the authority figure, the Resh, would have like a sheriff's star on his chest or something, Here's the alpha dog, as it were. Somebody else said it almost looks like legs running. And you have his body with his arms, Interestingly enough, it's the letter Aleph, and it means both. Remember, it's the plan that's set in motion, like the one running, and it's also like the authority of the star on the chest of the man. And if Bet's kind of like a house or a body, then you could look at Bet Resh Aleph and say, well, here's the house, and a man standing out in front of the house and says, this is my place. Bet Resh Aleph. Then you got this letter Shin. Well, Shin actually we're going to get to next week. It's kind of like teeth, sharp teeth. And a mouth. It rips, it tears, it cuts, it chews, it consumes. Shin's also fire, and fire does the same thing. But you can kind of see that in the shape of the letters. And then there's this yod. And of course, back at week 10 where we did the yod, remember we had the excavator? This big arm that grabbed rocks and grabbed them and threw them into another pile over here. And then and we had the voice of the yodeling of Tarzan, playing off the word yodel, and oh, as he was throwing the rocks. And it was like a picture of Yahweh's hand making these spheres, as it were, of different types of planets and galaxies, and throwing them across the universe, playing on this as he was constructing what he would own because he made it. That's the word kona. We talked about it last week. I believe it's kuf nun. Hey, you own it because you made it. You brought it forth. It's yours. It's a picture of yod, hey, yod. I'm the artist, the creator. I'm revealing it or making it or expressing it, and I'm calling it my own. Yod, hey, yod. Yehi, as in the word yehi or, va yehi or. Different way to read it. Anyway, Beresh, that Resh Aleph Shin Yod, and then here's the Tav, which is the sign, the mark, the symbol, like the sign of the covenant. But here, and we'll get to this picture in a while, the silver cross, like the crossbones of a skull and crossbones flag that says, you go here and you're dead, you better count on it. This is the sign of the contract, the covenant. I'm telling you, you mess with me, you're dead. That's what skull and crossbones mean. What this emblem means is, this is life. You go here, you'll live. You better count on it. And if you don't go here, then you're dead. You better count on that too. But this is the emblem of the, as it were, the head. You kind of see a kind of a skull and crossbones sort of motif. Here's kind of the head, eyes of fire, kind of the jaw, and the crossed, only it's not crossbones, it's crossed silver. Silver is the metal of redemption. You're redeemed with silver. We'll get into that in a little bit. But that's the head and the cross, the tav of the covenant of life, the antithesis of the skull and crossbones. But here in these letters, what I spelled was Bet, Resh, Aleph, Shin, Yod, Tav. It's the word Bereshit. It's the first word in the scriptures. It actually has a very enlarged Bet. It's one of those jots and tittles. So when people say not one jot or tittle will depart from the scriptures until all these things be fulfilled, Monty Judah's study says that perhaps it might be one of these anomalies in the written script. The point is, the letter Bet means in. If this letter Resh is a picture of the exalted man, there's only one exalted man, and that's Mashiach. If Israel does what Israel is told, as we'll read in Zechariah and in Exodus and in Deuteronomy and all through the Tanakh, if Israel does what Israel is told, Israel's to be the exalted man, the exalted kingdom, the exalted one that Yahweh's favor, that his eye is upon. So whoever this Resh is, it's the one doing what Yahweh said. If Yeshua was to be considered good, thus sinless, by the reckoning of the plumb line of the Torah, he had to be sinless, without fault, without blame, without deviation. Therefore, he had to look like the Torah itself, the Word made flesh. He couldn't have done anything different. And if he said, follow me, then we should be doing what he did. And he said, I only do what I see my Father doing. I only say what I heard him say. What should we be doing? The Yod He Vav He stuff, the blue, purple, red, white stuff. We should be dressed in blue, purple, red, white. Metaphorically, I'm doing this on purpose for the sake of exalting the Resh. Not that you should, but when you have Zitziot, he says have one blue thread. So I made some with blue, purple, red, and white, like this, because it stands for Yod He Vav He. He didn't say you couldn't have other colors. He said have at least a blue thread, because then you'll remember that I made this place, and I make up the rules because I made this place. That's why blue, the color of the Yod, speaks of the Creator, and the throne room floor was sapphire, which is generally regarded as a blue color. I'm just trying to give you these associations kind of over and over. The point is, how would you read this the Eriktology way, looking at the Paleo Hebrew letters, if you don't know how to read Hebrew? Bet, in, the big house. Resh, the man of the house, the flag of the house, The one who, the flagship in a navy is the ship that the admiral rides in. You might have a fleet of 100 ships or 10 ships, but the one the admiral's riding in, that's the flagship. This is kind of like a picture of the flagship house of the universe. Israel is the flagship house of the peoples of the earth. The earth is the flagship planet of the various rocks that he threw into the universe, according to the scriptures that he's given us. Whether or not there's other creatures or beings or aliens on other planets, he's Yahweh, the Elohim of hosts, Zavot. He could have made any number of other creatures. Heavens above, earth beneath, water beneath the earth. Whether it's talking about birds and fish, or whether it's talking about what we call demons or angels or space aliens or whatever they might be, he's Yahweh, the creator of them all. At his word, they do his bidding. But he gave us a choice. We can choose to do his bidding, and apparently Yeshua was the one who accurately chose and accurately did his bidding, and bids us to do likewise. But if we invent a religion in his name, which says, you don't have to do his bidding, don't you see a disconnect there? And if you could say, oh, he imparts the fact that we've done his bidding, though we don't have to, because that's his gift. Is it? Sure, it says right there in the Bible. Really? By which translation? Why, the one I've got, of course. Look, it says right here in plain English. But if it doesn't say that in Hebrew, according to the writings that Yeshua himself was referencing, how do we know we haven't been lied to by the English version that we have? How do we know that? Oh, well, this guy Jesus, he did away with all that because he knew it was too hard. Really? Moshe said, it's not too hard for you, it's right in your mouth. Just do it. Right in your mouth. Here's how easy it is. Eat unleavened bread for a week in the first month, the month of springtime. And as you eat unleavened bread, your children will say, why are we eating unleavened bread? And you'll tell them the story of the Exodus. The story of the Exodus is part of the Torah. So as you're telling them the Torah, eating unleavened bread, the words are in your mouth. And you're doing what he said as the words are in your mouth, explaining to your children. The instructions are to do what he said and to teach your children. And what he said was, don't work on certain days. You can worship any day you want. You can worship on Sunday. You can even worship and go to church on Christmas and Easter. It really doesn't matter. What he said was, don't work on his set-apart days. Bet Resh Aleph Shin Yod Tav. In the Exalted One, Mashiach, Aleph first, as the first order of business, before anything else was set in motion or set running. Before anything was set to run, into Mashiach, into the Resh, first. Shin, El Shaddai. The monogram of El Shaddai is the Shin, the consuming fire, the provider and sustainer of all benefits, and the one who says, enough. The word dalet yod, die, where we get the English word die, which means that's enough, or it's a matter of sufficiency, it's one that says, I started this thing, and I can end this thing. Hence, you go back to this picture, and the yellow letter is the Aleph, which is the beginning. The silver letter is the Tav, which is the end. Yeshua said, I'm the beginning and the end. I'm the Aleph and the Tav. Shin is the one who can consume what he made and says, it's over. That's it. It's done. And he's the only one who has the authority. Aleph Shin is the word ash, which is fire. Resh Aleph Shin is the word head. So in the head of fire, Yod is created or established or built, Tav, the covenant. Well, then who is this Resh? Let's go back and read it again. Bet, embodied, encased, fabricated into substance of materiality. Of the Resh, the exalted man, is the head, the source out of which everything else will come. The responsible party, the Sar, who will make sure it happens. Like the headwaters of a river is the Rosh, the head of a river, where all the waters flow from. The source, the one who is responsible for maintaining and seeing to it that the things that he wanted to get done does get done. So he makes them as easy as a little bracelet chain instead of so hard that it's impossible for anybody to do what he said. He makes them easy enough for everyone to do exactly what he said. And it's his responsibility to see to it. So when Yeshua comes and says, here, let me walk it out and I'll show you exactly what it's all supposed to be. He didn't walk it out and say, you guys can't do this. He said, no, you guys must do this. But in the Resh first, as the first order of business, El Shaddai, the Almighty, is the other way it's translated, Yod, has built and established and incorporated Tav, the covenant. What covenant? The 22 letters of the Hebrew Aleph Bet, signified by the Tav. Aleph, I will, Tav, it's accomplished. Everything in between, like book covers, is described by the 22 letters of the Aleph Bet. That's why we're studying this. So what this says is, one way to read this, is that everything he determined to express about himself, to reveal to humanity, to the universe that he made, is incorporated in Aleph through Tav. And all that stuff, first, before anything was set in motion, he packed into the Resh. The Resh is the embodiment of the Aleph through Tav, as El Shaddai, the Almighty, fabricated it, made it, constructed it, and caused it to be his symbol, the Tav, his autograph, his identity, his character and nature. And it's right there in the word Bereshit. The question is, who is the Resh? One way to find out. What do these alphabetic letters mean? If this is what he plugged into, Bet in embodiment form, and called it the Resh, from which everything else would come, then with the meanings of these 22 letters are the identity of the Mashiach. If you know what these 22 letters mean, that's his identity. Yeshua said, I'm the door. The door to what? The door to understanding what these things mean. Daniel 12:4. Hide the words and seal the book. Ayin, Dalet, Ayin, Tav. Until the time, Kuf Zadi. We've only got a minute left here in this section. We talked about this before. It's a catch-22. Ayin, Dalet. Ayin is understanding. Understand the door, hinged with Ayin Tav. Understand the Tav, the sign of the covenant. What is the Tav, the sign of the covenant? Well, we maintain that the 22 letters are the covenant. If you know these meanings of the 22 letters, it is the covenant. But what do the 22 letters mean? You can go to all different places and read all different things about what the letters mean. But Yeshua, if he says, I'm the door, understand the door, Yeshua himself is the plumb line, the mechanism of calibrating what these letters mean. If you understand who Yeshua is, truly the guy in the lineup of telling the truth, if you really know who Yeshua is, you can identify these 22 letters. And once you know the 22 letters, you can use them as the mechanisms of identifying who the true guy is, because they have to match. Anybody who says anything to the contrary of these 22 letters cannot be the true Mashiach, no matter how many beautiful songs they sing, no matter how many wonderful oratories their pastors present, no matter what glorious miracles their priests and prophets may display. Read Deuteronomy. If they lead you to Elohim Achrim, gods of others. But see, this word Achrim also means one who comes later, strange, next, in the future, different than your forefathers have known about. Yahweh talks about that in Ezekiel and Isaiah and Jeremiah and Deuteronomy and Zechariah. That we Israel, collectively, have gone after strange deities, newcomers that were not displayed and made known to our forefathers. Which forefathers? Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Moshe, Joseph, David. Who's Jesus Christ? A newcomer, lately arrived, that our forefathers didn't know? Or is he the embodiment of the Torah, the Word made flesh, the Aleph Bet? Tav, accomplished according to the terms of the contract. Unmistakably identical to every word that Yahweh ever said, he being the manifestation, who in him first was established the covenant, and nothing he can do but display the covenant. Every word out of his mouth is the covenant. Every action he ever took is the covenant. You can't trick him. You can't trip him up, because the only thing that comes out of him is the covenant, exactly as Yahweh presented in the Torah that he gave to Israel. And he said to Israel, you are the pupil, the apple of my eye. And to you, Israel, all the peoples of the world should look to and acknowledge. And when you're doing what I said, the same way Yeshua did what I said, you will be exalted. You will be glorified. And instead of the people saying, there's one of those guys, let's get him, they will say, please, can one of them live among us? Because we see the blessing of Yahweh when they are thriving in our community. And that day is what we're looking forward to, just around the corner, I believe, as we regard these words. We're on the break.